Hello, this is Paul Lennon. Greetings from La Antigua, Guatemala, where this Dubliner has taken up his abode for the past 3 years, and where I've been living with my wife Aura, happily, happily ever after. Uh, and today I'm hoping to entertain you to some degree amidst this crisis by reading my autobiography to you. It's called Our Father Who Art in Bed, a Knave and Sentimental Dubliner in the Legion of Christ. Uh, the original version came out in 2008, and I had put the author as myself, J.Paul Lennon, John Paul Lennon, my dear friends, Paul, two friends and family, Paul Lennon. Uh, I said the co-founder of this Mexican religious order, and because the Legion was founded in 1941, and I joined in 1961. I was one of the first Irish guys, not the very, almost the very, 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 very first. And you'll learn about very, very first when I'm reading the story. Right now, today is the 28th of March 2020, so we're in the middle of the coronavirus crisis. So I can't but take a moment silence for all the people who have passed away, for their family and friends, for all the lovely people in Italy where I've lived. I love the Italians. Spain, where I've also lived. I have friends in these countries, and all over the world who have been stricken by this terrible plague. Take a moment to remember them, and I don't want to be too flippant or as I speak. I tend to have that Dublin sense of humor, which is always kind of joking to some degree. It's a mixture of joking and seriousness, which very often strangers, as we would say, do not understand. Especially my poor Mexican friends, they don't know whether I'm laughing or crying sometimes, And they say I have this black Irish humor. But anyway, I can be serious and I can be sad when the time comes for that. So let's put these people in the presence of their, what is it called? Their greater power. Catholics, of course, we're calling him God, Jesus, Blessed Virgin. So let me start off with this and say hello to all of you, and God bless you, as we would say. Dia es muerit, as you remember the old Irish language, with all our blessings, the Lord and Mary be with you, because we're Irish Catholics, we can't help it, And then the answer is, Dia es muera is Pádraig, excuse me. So you had to come back with a better one, God and Mary and Patrick, and then it would be and Kevin and Colmkill and Bridget. No. Anyway, here we are. Let's start into this little book. And actually, in the very first, on the original page, I had a photograph of myself with Father Maciel, who is kind of like the villain of the story. Father Maciel, the villain of the story. I always knew he was a villain, but people thought he was a saint, and they had him as a hero, and they venerated him, and that was absolutely crazy. But anyway, there we go. I'm going to read from this, some passages from this, and hopefully, you can always turn it off. The original title was Our Father Who Art in Bed. Bless me for thinking of such a bright title. Conservative or good Catholics, traditional Catholics, as we call them sometimes in the United States, they would have shied away from this book like the plague, because it seemed to be like a mockery of the Our Father, of the prayer, and that was probably my mistake, because in Spanish this would not have been a problem, as I'm tired of explaining to people. This would have been Nuestro Padre que estás en la cama. Okay, so Spanish majors, Nuestro Padre que estás en la cama, which is okay, because we called Father Maciel Nuestro Padre. That's the play on words. Our Father, we used to call him, but in Spanish it has its own ring to it. And it's not to be mistaken for the Our Father prayer, which in Spanish is Padre nuestro que estás en el cielo. It's different. Spanish speakers are not going to have that mistake, but English speakers see, because it sounds the very same in English. So they thought this was a blasphemy. Then I changed the title. I knew I'd put my foot in it. I changed the title to Our Father Maciel, who art in bed. That was probably another flop, So then, third edition, fourth edition, and naive and sentimental Dubliner in the Legion of Christ. Hopefully that went down better. But by that time, people were probably sick and tired of me. And then I had to explain, or wrote another article. Why did you say this thing about Nuestro Padre, who are que está en la cama? Why about, what the hell about the bed thing? And when I wrote that book, I was not focusing, on Father Maciel as a pedophile, which he really was, and abusing the boys in his bed. It was horrible. When I was in the Legion, I didn't know this about Father Maciel. So I didn't have that kind of problem with him, thank goodness. But for me, he was a hypochondriac. He was always getting sick, at least when he came to the mother house in Rome. He was always sick. He always needed to be in bed. Maybe he was using this as an excuse to abuse the boys. Well, I didn't know. But for me, he was always sick, and he needed a doctor, and he needed his injection, and he needed his special food. And so for me, he was never a saint. But for thousands he was. And we know he even deceived the Pope. Poor saint now, I would never have made him a saint. J.Paul II admired Father Maciel because Father Maciel had the factory for making priests who the Pope thought were missionaries for Latin America. Oh my God, he was really out of the loop. God help him. And bringing in tons of money to the church. Father Maciel was the greatest Catholic fundraiser of the 20th century, it can be said. And that's the contention of Jason Berry and Gerald Renner in their book, Vows of Silence. And a later book written by Jason Berry called Give Unto Rome, a play on the words Give Unto Caesar, where he writes about Vatican finances. And has a whole chapter devoted to Father Maciel and the Legion of Christ with their $1 million budget, which they have to this day. See how I'm getting taken away? I'm going off on a tangent here, but let's start. What was I talking here about? My little book, which hasn't been very successful, but anyway. Originally, I had written some acknowledgements, especially to my family. I'd been estranged from my family for so much time, so I felt like I needed to say, God, remember my family, because I'd been 23 years in the Legion, cut off from my family in Ireland. I'd become very Mexican, very foreign, The only thing I didn't lose was my accent. Well, you never lost your accent. Like a good Dubliner, I'd say, why should I? Anyway, sorry, chaps. During the writing, I came to fully realize how much I loved my deceased parents, Jack Lennon, love them, present tense, Christine O'Connor, and my sisters Patty, Mary, Carmel, and Christine, their husbands, their children, all of them who welcomed me with open arms after many years of estrangement caused by my membership in the Legion of Christ. I'm also very close and indebted, Spanish, indebted to Jose Barba, Juan Jose Vaca, Arturo Jurado, Alejandro Espinosa, Saul Barrales, and other survivors of sexual abuse by Father Maciel, who provided information and support, and who I related to as my friends. Thank goodness. They're still with us today, now in their 80s. I will always fondly remember my old Legion confreres, the wonderful people of Quintana Roo Mission in Mexico. I was there. I was in that region, which you might know as you might identify as the Yucatan Peninsula of latter day or later recent Cancun fame. And when I went down the missions in 1971, Cancun was just being discovered. I was not one of the absolute first Legion of Christ missionaries there. I was like very soon after it was founded in 1970. And Cancun really didn't exist at that time. Cancun was an island that was separated from the mainland by a few meters, and there was no way of getting from one side to the other. They built a little bridge, and that's how Cancun became Cancun, thanks to President Luis Echeverria Alvarez. Anyway, here I am. I remember my confreres. Some of them are still down there. These Irish guys. What devotion to the cause. I remember them, Patrick and Bernard, and so forth, and a few deceased wonderful missionaries down there. And I also remember my students in Mexico City, where I was for 6 years or so, 7 years in Mexico City, where I founded and manned the School of Faith, the Escuela de la Fe, which I set up with Father Maciel. He used me as his instrument to set that up. And part of my getting into tangles with him. And those students, who mostly then became members of the Regnum Christi, the lay branch of the Legion of Christ, would have turned their backs on me when I dared to break away from the Legion and criticize Father Maciel and the Legion at this time. They were still faithful to him, so I was anathema, ostracized at least for them. Thank you to those who touched me and were touched by me during my legionary life and my priestly ministry. I love being a priest. And to Regain, Regain is a little organization that we founded about 20 years ago. It's still going strong there on the internet. It's a web page which talks about revealing the true nature and the functioning of the Legion of Christ. Regnum Christi, Regnum Christi Federation. They changed the name, trying to get away from Father Maciel and maybe even, trying to get away from Legion of Christ, which might have a bad name. So now they kind of morphed into Regnum Christi. And now they want to call the whole shebang, because this is like a morphing. This is a metamorphosis, constantly changing their name into Regnum Christi Federation. Now, there may be still some of those surviving in Ireland and in the British Isles, for those who are close to home. And Legion's still going strong in Europe and in the US of A, mostly. I think those are the strongholds. Europe, USA, Ireland almost died out because of a whole lot of priestly scandals too, perhaps. And also because of the tough time we're giving them, we're giving the Legion, because we Irish speak up. We don't remain silent when we think we've been abused or manipulated in any way. And as our friends at RTE will tell you, Mike Pilo, who has investigated the beginning of the Legion of Christ in Ireland and how the heck it got into the Archdiocese of Dublin when Archbishop John Charles McQuaid was in charge. Very stern man, and still the Legion was able to, engatusar, as they say in Mexican, as they say in Spanish. They were able to kind of deceive him in some way and get their foot in the Diocese of Dublin, and they were going strong for a good few years there. Father Maciel wanted to get the Irish, not because he loved the Irish, but he knew that the Irish would be the stepping stone into the United States, where the Legion became very, very popular and very strong and had great benefactors, millions of dollars. Anyway, thank you to my fellow travelers, believers and non-believers. I have to say this because I've been exposed to a lot of things after leaving the Legion. I was a diocesan priest for a few years in Washington, D.C. Many different people have helped me. people of all religions, Christians, non-Christians, Jewish people, uh, people who are agnostics, atheists. I mean, we're all in the same boat now, and particularly now with the virus, you know, we need to unite more than to separate and divide. So here we are. Also, my acknowledgement, my respect, my appreciation to all my colleagues. Well, I wanted to say especially to Diana M, my clinical supervisor when I was working in Arlington County Department of Human Services in Virginia, USA, during 13 years. So it would have been what, I don't know, 13 years. What's 13 years? 2000 to 2013 or something like that. I worked there, and they were great years of my life, fantastic. And that's where I learned to be a really good psychotherapist. Not joking. All to my Spanish and English speaking friends who have accompanied me during the past 20, 30, 35 years with the warmth of their friendship, excuse me, and hospitality. When I left the Legion and was in the United States, was kind of like my safe haven after getting out of Mexico. Kind of had to, jump out of there. I was really in a terrible crisis. So I landed in the US of A in Washington, thanks to some friends of mine, uh, great friends. They know who they are if they're looking at this. I'm not going to mention their names, they might be embarrassed. These are great guys. And thank you very much to them. But then I set up my little support group in Washington, D.C. Besides my three priest friends, I had three priest friends who were coming out of the Legion at the same time. This is 1985, I believe. Yes, 95. So there was Paul Lennon, me. There was Declan Murphy. There was Kevin Farrell, who's now a cardinal, and who's else? And Peter Cronin. So the four musketeers here in the Washington area at that time, and we supported each other. And then when I kind of stepped outside the priesthood, I was still very Mexicanized, and I still am very identified with Mexico because I was there like from the age of 27 to 40 or something like that. Give me a break. This were my very formative years. I grew up in Mexico, you might say, because I didn't grow up, thanks to them, I grew up somehow, which I'd never have done of it just being inside the Legion, but I met a lot of lovely people. Anyway, so I was supported in Washington by three Mexican couples, that is Roberto and Romelia, uh, RIP, lovely people, Alberto and Judith, another Mexican couple, and Gustavo and Maria Luisa. Maria Luisa is not a Mexican. She married a Mexican, but she's Cuban, I think Colombian. She's quite a lovely background there. And then I had what I would call my English-speaking friends. I did have some English-speaking friends. Esmeralda and Eugene, Portuguese. And Esmeralda was the one who cooked up these wonderful meals for this poor priest who is leaving the priesthood. Bless her soul. Eugene, and then another three English-speaking friends. It was Sally, and there was Theo, and Sybil. Theo was a Swiss German, Sally was an American, and Sybil was an English from Staffordshire or something like that. And she helped me to reconcile with the English people. Such a lovely person. Also, special brotherly thanks to Glenn and Kevin. These were the guys my friends, my buddies who supported me. Glenn, who co-founded Regain with me and worked so strenuously for years and years with me. So thank you very much, Glenn. Kevin, my dear friend, he's my buddy, the brother like I never had. Thanks to Jerry Renner, the writer, the investigative reporter. Que en paz descanse, R.I.P., requiescat in pace, may he rest in peace. And Jason Berry, still down there in New Orleans, writing away. Good old Jason. And finally to Diana Friedman and Mike Livingston, who had helped me with the original edition of this book. And then to Alberto, my friend, thank you, Alberto, I'm not going to mention last names, who helped me with the photos. He's my official photographer. Thank you, Alberto. And finally, then a little flourish at the end To beloved Ireland that bore me, to Mexico that made me, and to the land of the free that welcomed me. And then started off at that time. This first book had lovely photographs. Hey, lovely people. My parents, my parents, Jack Lennon, John Jack, Skipper Lennon, all from both from Dublin and from inner city Dublin, And my mother, Chris, Chrissy O'Connor. So lovely Irish name. They were married in St. Nicholas of Myra Church on the 15th of August. What was that? The Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary, 1939. So that's it. Daddy was born, so Daddy would have been 29, and she would have been 27. Which so they were not too young, and they were not too old. They were ripe to start a family, which they did almost immediately. God bless them. And it was a typical Dublin marriage because like the man was supposed to be like 2 years older than the woman. I remember this. It was just, it was a tradition, and that the man had to be older than the woman. He may not have been more mature with the woman, but he was a little older than the woman. And he was supposed to have a steady job, I suppose. And dedication here to my dear friend, Father Peter Cronin. He was with me in Washington. I was with him in Washington. He left the Legion and became a wonderful priest, a wonderful diocesan priest, really great pastor, as they would say in the United States. Died prematurely, 1999. Younger than me, and departed. So that was a great loss for me. I did not know how much he cared about me until after he died, and he left me some things in his will. What's going on here? A lovely thing about Peter, he's lovely. He was from, I think he studied in Drimna Castle or something like that. Well, to my dear friend Peter Cronin, may he rest in peace, and to all other Legion of Christ and Regnum Christi survivors who truthfully tell their tale. Forward. Frank McCourt, move over. If you could make millions out of telling your tale of a miserable Irish Catholic childhood, why shouldn't I be able to make at least a few hundred out of my exciting Irish Catholic story with the Legion of Christ Mexican religious order? You were born in the USA and spent your miserable childhood in Ireland. I was born in Dublin and had no miserable childhood, but then spent most of my adult years being miserable in Spain, Italy, and Mexico with the Legion of Christ. It all started out very nice, but by the time it was over, I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown and feeling very sorry for myself. Hey friends, this is a story of survival. I'm a survivor. So this is what we're hoping for now. Let us survive. Let us take care of ourselves. And I survived thanks to the grace of God, as good old, what was his name, Tennessee Williams would say, and thanks to the kindness of strangers. Streetcar named Desire, I think it is, right? Blanche. I survived thanks to the kindness of strangers. Yeah, me too, Blanche. Well, that was in 1984 when I got out of the Legion. And since I left Mexico and came to the USA in 1985, life has improved. Again, we're talking when I wrote this 12 years ago. From being a plain nervous wreck, I became a nervous wreck in recovery. With no intention here of vying with memoirs that may be more literary and amusing. They do exist. I've seen them. Very nice. The Irish are good writers. I will tell the simple and serious saga of a naive and sentimental Dublin Catholic boy and his passion for death with and resurrection after the Legion of Christ. Regnum Christi, if you want to call it. This story is indisputably unique. I have always been burdened by that serious character defect, castigated by novice master novice instructor, superior spiritual director, and as such, really totally disregarding canon law, excuse me. Father Arme, in his explanation of rules in Salamanca, this was individualismo, was a real no-no. You had to conform, conformidad. You had to conform to the rules and conform to the spirit and mystique of the Legion of Christ. This was drilled into us. So there we go, the indoctrination. Hope you understand. Individualism. But this story is also universal, one with which many legionaries can identify. Now, the whole thing is here that this should be bilingual because most of the survivors or the former members or the active members of the Legion of Christ are Spanish speakers. And the Legion continues to mine Mexico, which is the country of origin. And they continue to have these apostolic schools, which are junior seminaries where they're recruiting boys at the age of 10 and 11 to go into these high schools or whatever they call secondary schools and to start training them from the priesthood from that early age. And this is something I can tell you I and many others are staunchly against. So let's hope the English-speaking people and His Holiness back there at the Vatican get the message that these so-called escuelas apostólicas, the apostolic schools, these junior seminaries, which probably come from the Council of Trent a couple of hundred years ago and continue to survive and should have been stopped after Vatican II, 1962 to 65. They should have been stopped because everybody's saying now that the best place for a person to prepare for the priesthood is in close contact with his family and not separated from his family. But I'm going on and on. As you can see, I've got a couple of axes to grind. Bear with me. There'll be no screaming and shouting, hopefully, as I was told once that Mr. Lennon, when I was sued by the Legion, Mr. Lennon is ranting and raving, if you don't mind. Because you disagree, you're ranting and raving. A common cult tactic, may I say, in parentheses. Those who did not reach premature ordination in the Legion of Christ, those señoritas, beautiful ladies, young ladies who did not reach their consecration, because that whole lay branch of lay people, what about that? That's kind of redundant. Of young women and young men called the Regnum Christi, Kingdom of Christ. We're big time. We don't mess around. You know, this is like the Legion of Christ and the Kingdom of Christ. Anyway, calm down, Paul. So many of those, hopefully a lot of those people who were lucky enough to leave before ordination and before becoming consecrated, because that's what they call those consecrated young women or consecrated men to exist in the Regnum Christi. They're called third degree, which is a terrible name. It's translated from Spanish, tercer grado, femenino, female, and male, tercer grado, masculino. But as I say, these people who have never kind of come to the final commitment to this organization may sigh, there, but for the grace of God go I. So see what you saved yourself from. On the other hand, I personally am one of those, in my personal experience, I have no regrets. I'm not a regretter. I'm 76 going on 77. I'm not a regretter. I thank God for being alive. I thank God for being healthy, for having my wits about me still, to a certain degree. My wife might disagree. She still can't get over my obsession with this Legion of Christ thing. I ask her, beseech her to be patient because we've been pretty much traumatized with our contact. So we're survivors, you know. I have no regrets about my 23 years in the Legion of Christ. Somehow I did it my way. That's my song, maybe one of my songs. You know, the Irish were always singing. Well, chapter one is called Recruiting. Chapter one is recording, and I was waxing very literature-ish when I wrote this. And each chapter, which is a bunch of chapters, starts with the letter R. So this is recruiting, and you're going to see that this particular chapter starts with the song which was very popular at that time, and which we sang as we were being recruited in Spanish, captados, which kind of means something else, almost like being captured by the Legion of Christ. You know, a bunch of 20 Dubliners, all enthusiastic 17-year-olds finishing our high school, our leaving certificate, and did we get good marks, and how many honors did we have? And God, we were so it was such an enthusiastic and idealistic generation. You know, which later generations may not. I don't think they understand. Hard for them to understand just how naive, how generous. I think generous, maybe they'd say we were stupid, but you know, we consider ourselves idealistic and generous, and a lot of faith, in the church, etc. You know, a lot of respect for priests, as we'll see. You know, whatever the priest said went. You know, he was like, you might say, God was speaking through the priest. But we were singing the song of the time. I'm going to try to sing it. The voice is not so good, but you know, we all we all think we can sing. You know, this of course was called "I Joined the Legion" from the White Horse Inn, which was quite a musical at the time, I take it. And the song was traditional. It can be found all over the place. Joseph Locke was the singer. So 1961. Maybe was even old at that time, but you know we were singing it because we were joining the Legion, and here was the song. You know. My heart is broken, but what care I? Such pride inside me was woken. I shall do my best not to cry by and by. When the final farewells must be spoken, I'll join the Legion, that's what I'll do. And in some far distant region, where hearts are staunch and true, I shall start my life anew. I'll do or die. You'll know the reason why when told of bold Leopold's last stand for the fatherland. In some Abyssinian French dominion I will do my bit and fall for the flag if I must. Where the desert sand is nice and handy, I'll be full of grit. You won't see my heels for the dust. I'll do or die. You'll know the reason why when told of bold Leopold's last stand for the fatherland. Goodbye, goodbye. I wish you all a last goodbye. I'm off to Bundoran. Goodbye, County Donegal, Ireland. Goodbye. I wish you all a last goodbye. That's enough. Part number one.